All right, hello everyone. This is me, Ms. Nawundu Diva, divinely inspired, vibrantly anointed artist, and I'm back again with season 7, episode 3 review, reflections episode of Iyanla Fix My Life. As we all know, as I already did in the review, check up here if you did not see the review. I guessed it. This particular episode was very much about, working parent on the road, a child having to be left somewhere else, and feeling a certain way, and that wounding and hurting them, and then all of that mess that created having to now be fixed and be worked through and processed through towards a place of healing.
To surrender some of the stuff that works for you now.
But if it's working for me now.
But is it working for you now? Or are you sitting here with me?
Okay, so the first thing I will say is I finally figured out that we're in season 7 and we're in episode 3. And in this episode, there were about 5 segments that I counted. Luenelle met with Iyanla Van Zandt at a comedy club, and then next segment was Iyanla meeting with Danelle, and then third segment was Luenelle meeting with Iyanla, and then the fourth segment was the three of them. So the segment where now the facilitation and the healing process happens. And then the fifth segment is all three watching some of Luenelle's colleagues in the stand-up comedy game, speaking life into her and encouraging her. The first segment is really about Luenelle meets Iyanla at a comedy club, where she's most comfortable. Does a little short set for her, and they sit down. And this first segment is really about introduction and about setting a certain level of intention. And what is the intention that Luenelle had, and what then Iyanla is going to come in and help them process through her with her daughter. So they meet. Luenelle does a little short 5-minute comedy set for her, and then they sit down and then they begin to talk about the hidden masks that people hide behind. And that, being a comedian is one of Luenelle's hidden masks. What I saw here is that, there's a dissonance. There was a dissonance in Luenelle in, respectfully speaking, there was a dissonance in her, between who she says she is and who she shows up as. Who she says she is, mother, comedian, a nurturer, versus the report from her daughter that it's not quite that way. Two different things. So there's a dissonance there. And this came up when Iyanla asked her who she was. Who are you? And she was saying, I'm a mother, I'm a nurturer, I'm a comedian, and then, but her masks tell a different story. Obviously, there is a gathering of facts and backstory before the show. The show of the healing process begins. There are all these masks that represent a completely different person from what Luenelle says she is. And I found that particularly interesting because that is, again, let me go back to this particular season. So far has been, I said it was about parents, but I think so far I'll say it's about mothers and daughters, the mother and daughter or children mother relationship, and the breakdown that can happen in that relationship and how it can be repaired, and examples of how that can be repaired. So this dissonance is quite interesting because it's a common thread throughout all the parents. The parents will point to all the good things they've done, which is their success story. I'm a mother, I birthed somebody, I carried somebody, birthed somebody, didn't kill them in the process. I'm a comedian, successful career, you know, I'm a friend, I'm a good friend, well liked, a lot of people, but they won't talk about their failures. They won't say, but I left my child, but I abandoned my child, but I traumatized my child because I had my own unresolved healing and anger and hurt and trauma. I passed it on to my child, and those are the parts where I failed. There's always that dissonance that I'm finding with parents in that regard, which it's been a very continuous thread from the first episode of this season up until now. There's this dissonance where a parent wants to highlight their successes, but they want to shroud their failures. There was something though about this episode to me. I felt like Iyanla did not scrape the pot and lick the spoon. I felt like there were a lot of underlying layers of issues that needed to be addressed. And she kind of just touched on what was obvious and at the surface. And perhaps, you know, that has to do with the intention that the person who is attending the show and is reaching out and saying, I want you to help me in this way. It has to do with that. So if it's not her job to go into levels and touch on issues and other buttons that she's not been tasked to touch on as a healer. And that's why it's important to, before you go into a healing process, you set your intention. What is my intention? What do I want to touch on? What do I want to process through? And what do I want to talk about and tell the truth about, take accountability about, and heal about? So as much as for me watching, I felt like, I feel like there's, you know, brush stroking and kind of going through this process too fast. But there's also the intention that the person sets. And again, as a practitioner, it's your job to listen and to serve people in the way that they wish to be served, and not say, well, actually, you're telling me that this is what your problem, but I'm gonna tell you what your actual problem is. Let's work on that rather, instead of work on this. It's a skill. You have to listen to what your person, your client that is coming to you and saying, help me with this, wants you to help them with. It's not that they don't know that they have other issues, they have other layers, there's a whole intersection of things to work through. But again, it's important to pinpoint exactly what this time around, in this instance, as a client, you are wanting to deal with, you are wanting to check off your list. And I think that's important. Again, you know, this episode is about a breakdown between a child and their mother, a daughter and a mother, as a result of, again, unhealed brokenness within the parent, unhealed trauma, unattended to trauma, and then it's passed on. And as a result, what happens is that we don't actually get to know our parents because we don't know their story, we don't know their backstory, and then we show up to each other, parent to child, child to parent. We show up to each other with these masks on, and we show up to each other playing roles. So a parent will show up, you know, playing the role of provider, but they won't show up as a woman or a man to their child, just a mere human being to their child. And also, that is indicative of there not being a genuine truth-telling practice in the relationship, that people show up in their masks and they show up as a role as opposed to as their authentic self, as a human being, as a daughter, you know. And I thought that was very interesting just watching this particular episode, is that, you know, it's important for children to know their parents just as human beings. I think parents get so caught up in the role of being a parent that even when that role has elapsed and has come to pass and there's no making up whatever's been whatever opportunity has been lost, there's no making it up. There's still, you grown, and they're still wanting to be a parent. They're still wanting to create a dynamic like this of parent to child. And beyond a certain point, it doesn't apply. Beyond a certain, and as long as there are masks, and as long as there's no truth having been told between the two, what is my grievance with my parent? What is my parent's grievance with me? What can each of us hold each other accountable for? And then what can each of us ask for forgiveness from each other for? When these things are not done, people just show up as masks. People just show up as roles, and they play those roles and they fit perfectly into that song and dance. But are you happy? Are you feeling whole? Are you feeling authentic? No. And what's going to happen is that all that trauma, all that hurt, all that brokenness bubbles up and shows up in how you act out, in how you're dismissive, in how you're angry, in how you shut down, be emotionally unavailable. However, it does show up. It does show up. It does Babalanda, and it shows up. So that was interesting to learn from this particular episode for me. More on these masks, I would say it's also this thing where, Iyanla says, it's a way for parents to avoid the pain that they've caused their children, that they show up in a mask, and then you must show up in a role, in a song and dance of a role. It's because they're trying to avoid the pain that they know they caused you as a child, and their own pain that is unresolved. So they show up as a mask, they show up as a role, and then you as a child are forced to show up as well as a role and as a mask to cover the pain that has been caused to you as a child. I did allude to this last week, that it's a form of kind of manipulation where, because a parent is unwilling to do something in order to undo an entangled part of a relationship, a knot, they're willing to undo a knot, so they force everybody around them to show up and pretend as if that knot is not there, and pretend as if that pain, that trauma is not showing up in how they show up in the world, how they show up as a mother, how they show up as a sister, how they show up as a human being in the world, which is a way that is not necessarily useful, not necessarily innocuous, and not necessarily conducive to those around them, having the freedom to speak their truths as well as be heard. When Iyanla meets with Luenelle, obviously the story comes up that, Luenelle was obviously an on-the-road comedian, had to go to work, and that she had to watch her mother leave her. In fact, Luenelle moved from Auckland to LA and left the child, Luenelle, with her dad and grandmother. And Luenelle thought that was a clean break. I'm leaving her with her people, I guess. I'm leaving her with her people. I'm not abandoning my child. I'm leaving her in hands that are capable and hands that I trust. And I come back every time I get the opportunity. But to the child, that looks like abandonment. And it's interesting because Luenelle herself comes from a form of abandonment for a reason. A different reason, but a reason. Her mom she's her mom's 8th child, and her mother was pregnant when her mom's sister shot her dad. And so the mom, after this occurrence, made this decision that I'm going to let Luenelle be brought up within the family by someone else, I think by a grandmother and an aunt, a grandmother or an aunt and an uncle. She was not, she wasn't given away for adoption. She was given over into the hands of someone else in the family to bring her up. And she says she doesn't understand how her mother, that was a conscious decision to give her up and abandon her, because this woman had 7 children, and on the 8th child you want to give up a child. That's a conscious decision. But Iyanla points out to her that this woman was pregnant with you, her man got shot, do you think she was in the right frame of mind to have you and keep you? And that even in giving you away to one of the family members or a couple of the family members to bring you up, she was not in her right frame of mind. There was a reason. As much as for you, there was a reason for you to give your daughter away and go on the road and build your career and chase after your dream. And there was a reason. So those things are very similar. And I thought that was interesting, that there was this pattern that was repeating itself, but because it looked different, the circumstances looked different, but the pattern was the same. Obviously, Luenelle doesn't have 7 children, and then Donnell is her 8th child. I think Donnell, it seems, is her only child. But again, the pattern repeated of the child that you bore having now to be raised by someone else for whatever the reason is. The pattern is repeated. And it's interesting that then Luenelle is asking for forgiveness from her child, seeking to have some kind of resolve around that with her child, but she won't give forgiveness to her mom for making that very same decision for her, perhaps at a time when her mother was not in the right frame of mind to now look after another child after the trauma she's just experienced. Her man has just been shot by her own brother. So this is Luenelle's story, and she also talks about how she feels like she's not seen or even heard unless it's for her career as a comedian. And I thought that was interesting that she was saying that to someone like Iyanla, because it reminded me of that conversation that she had with Oprah when they were now making up after many years of not having seen each other. And, Iyanla was saying to Oprah, I didn't think you liked me outside of my work. I thought you wanted me for the work, but not for who I am. And she said that I thought that you thought I was ghetto and that you only cared for the work and not who I am. I don't know if you remember that conversation, that 2-part conversation on the Oprah Winfrey Show in the last season of the Oprah Winfrey Show. And so I think I thought that was interesting that that theme came up, that, you have this successful comedian, very much loved comedian, and she believes that she's not seen and she's not accepted except if she's showing up and doing her work and being a comedian. And that's something to reckon with and to kind of work through and process through within yourself, in quantifying your own worth and your own value outside of your own work, and understanding the value that you bring beyond whom it provides for, but also the value that you bring in just being a well-adjusted human being amongst your friends, or a well-adjusted human being in your neighborhood. That's value. If you're not a noisy neighbor, you bring value to a neighborhood, because then that means people aren't having to deal with you every other day and tell you, could you keep quiet? Could you know what I mean? So, and I think people overlook these kind of values and their worth, that their currency that they bring to the table. That's not necessarily money. That's not necessarily providing. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with their career. They overlook these currencies that have nothing to do with these quantifiable, bankable things. But it's important to have those virtues as well, and that's also currency. Whether it's just being a kind person, a nice person, a nurturing person, always an ear that's always there to listen to people, someone there to always lean on. These are currencies. Everything doesn't have to be about what you can do to entertain someone or what you can do to provide for someone. So when Luenelle says that, she always tried to make her daughter feel very important, Iyanla's like, how can you make her feel important when you yourself don't know that you are important outside of being Luenelle? The nails, the eyelashes, the makeup, the big personality, the comedian. How are you supposed to give her what you don't have? You don't know you're important outside of that. And again, goes back to that theme of you cannot give what you do not have. And also that as children, you know, in part of processing our pain and our traumas, understanding what our parents had and what they didn't have, and to not lament what they didn't have to give as something we never got.